The first thing she noticed was that he blinked far less often than a normal human. That, and he had the unnerving habit of looking directly at her face without flinching, without shame, and without, most baffling of all, any attempt at flirtation. Kalira had come to understand human expressions well enough to distinguish the subtle signals: attraction, suspicion, disgust, confusion. But Ryan's gaze gave her nothing. It was like being studied by a very tired, very determined piece of furniture. She didn't like it. "So," she said, leaning against the wall of the outpost command bay, with the kind of casual indifference that took 10 years of elite training to perfect, "why are you looking at me like that, human?" He didn't answer, just stared for another 2 seconds, then looked back at the hollow display like she hadn't spoken. She counted the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3. Then his voice, low and dry, like gravel sliding across metal. "I wasn't aware I was looking at you. I wasn't aware your people were capable of lying without sweating," she snapped. "You've been staring at me for 3 rotations. Don't think I haven't noticed. I could paint the shape of your irises from memory." Ryan tapped a control on the panel and the display flickered. "That's unsettling." "I agree." He glanced at her again. His mouth didn't move, but she could see the edges of amusement in his eyes. Just a flicker. Enough to make her want to throw something. This human, this Lieutenant Ryan Marr, was a logistical officer. He wasn't even supposed to be on the front lines. Yet somehow he'd been assigned to the airline outpost as part of the diplomatic stabilization effort. Kalira had assumed he was a bureaucratic mistake, maybe someone's cousin or a political favor. But after a few cycles, she realized something stranger was going on. He didn't speak much, didn't engage in the petty banter her squad mates used to fill the silence. He just watched, quiet, controlled, waiting. Her instincts told her to be wary of men who waited like that. The outpost itself was perched on the edge of the Delari Rift, a fracture in the fabric of local space where ancient alien structures sometimes blinked into existence without warning. Most of them were dead, just bones of a long-forgotten civilization. But this particular outpost had been established because of one anomaly, a pulse signal, deep and rhythmic, emanating from beneath the rock. No one knew what it meant. Scientists poked at it. Politicians ignored it. Kalira stood guard while everyone pretended they weren't afraid of it. And Rian? He just listened. She caught him again later that day, alone in the comms room. He was standing in the dark, staring at the transmission hub like it was telling him bedtime stories. "Do humans find comfort in blinking lights?" she asked from the doorway. "Or are you communing with the spirits of obsolete data packets?" Ryan didn't flinch. "Just thinking. That's the 3rd time this week I've found you thinking near this equipment. Should I be concerned?" "Only if it starts talking back." She stepped inside, folding her arms. "You've been avoiding your assigned quarters. You sleep 2 hours at a time. You've rerouted security feeds to your personal access card, and you stare at me like I've misplaced something very important, and you're waiting for me to remember what it is." There was silence. Then, "Do you ever stop talking?" She smiled sweetly. "Only when I'm asleep, which, unlike you, I still do in standard cycles." He turned slightly, the faint blue glow of the monitors casting a strange shadow along his jawline. "I wasn't aware I needed your approval for my schedule." "Oh, you don't," she said. "But if you keep acting like a spy with insomnia, people will start asking questions. People with less charm than me. People with weapons that don't ask questions first." "Are you threatening me, Commander?" She shrugged. "Only a little. It's how we flirt on my world." He actually smiled at that, the first honest one she'd seen. It made her stomach lurch in a way she did not appreciate. A tremor ran through the floor, soft but distinct. The lights flickered. They both froze. Another tremor. "That's the 3rd one this week," she said. "Subsurface activity?" Ryan was already moving to the console, pulling up a seismic scan. His fingers danced across the interface with a fluency that shouldn't belong to a paper pusher. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "You're not helping your case," she said, stepping beside him. "Explain." "The signal is modulating. It's not just seismic. It's patterned." "Like language?" "Like music." She raised a brow. "I thought you weren't a poet." "I'm not," he said. But I remember this rhythm. I've heard it before. Her skin prickled. Where? He didn't answer right away. Then softly, in a dream, years ago, before I was even posted here. She stared at him. You're telling me you dreamed of alien tectonic rhythms? He looked at her then. Really looked. No, he said. I dreamed of you. The silence that followed was not comfortable. She should have laughed, should have scoffed. Instead, her mouth went dry. Is this a very elaborate attempt at seduction? She asked weakly. If it were, it's a terrible one. The tremor deepened. A siren blared somewhere in the east wing. Her comm buzzed with alerts. I have to check that, she said, stepping back. I'll come with you. She paused. Why? I have a feeling about this one. She considered him. I don't trust feelings. Neither do I, he said. But they've kept me alive so far. They jogged through the corridors together, boots thudding against metal. The sirens died abruptly as they neared the breach chamber. Inside, a storage unit had collapsed, metal torn outward like something had pushed from within. No sign of explosives, no signs of entry, just twisted wreckage. Kalira stepped forward. Her hand brushed a panel. It lit beneath her fingertips. She stepped back fast. That's not standard equipment, she said. That's alien tech. It wasn't here yesterday, Ryan said softly. They looked at each other. Neither spoke. Somewhere deep below, the pulse began again. Louder this time. Closer. She stared at the panel like it had just called her by her childhood nickname. It pulsed again under her hand, light crawling outward in geometric lines that vanished into the floor. Behind her, Rian didn't move, didn't speak. Kalira could feel his gaze, that same maddening calm, as if this was all part of some internal checklist he refused to share. You touched it, he said eventually. Thank you, Lieutenant. I had not noticed. Well, you usually touch things with a weapon. This is new. She turned, annoyed that he was still too calm. I didn't do anything. I brushed the panel. It activated on its own. He stepped forward and crouched by the twisted remains of the storage unit. Something in the metal shimmered, then retracted as if shy. Kalira reached for her sidearm. Don't, he said. I wasn't going to shoot it. You were absolutely going to shoot it. I was going to inspect it, aggressively. He sighed. Do you know what this is? She frowned. It wasn't here before. You said that yourself. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached out to touch the shimmering metal. Nothing happened. No light, no pulse. It was dead under his fingers. I think, he said slowly, it only responds to you. She blinked. Is this your version of flattery? Number, I've tried everything. Yesterday, last week, even the night before that tremor. Nothing ever lit up. He stood. But you touch it once, and it opens like an eager puppy. Kalira narrowed her eyes. I don't like puppies. That explains everything. The pulse came again, deeper now, more resonant. It echoed through the walls, through the bones. Something wasn't just calling. It was listening. She could feel it. And Ryan, for all his dry jokes and blank expressions, was tense now. He stood like a man hearing something no one else could. I want a full sweep of the lower corridors, she said. We'll start at the breach and move downward. If something's alive down there, I want to know. You sure you don't want to aggressively inspect it first? I'm saving my aggression. Try not to distract me. They moved through the corridor in silence. The outpost was built for utility, not comfort. Stark walls, dim lights, a faint smell of rust and regulation-approved sanitizer. Rian walked a step behind her, his eyes constantly scanning. Kalira didn't trust him, not exactly, but he had a knack for noticing things no one else did, and she needed that now. You really dreamed of me? She asked without turning. A beat passed. Yes. Was I at least doing something impressive? You were standing in a field of ash, staring at a broken sky. That's bleak. It was familiar. She paused and turned to look at him. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression, but this time there was something under it. Recognition. Maybe even sorrow. I've never been in a field of ash, she said. Not in this life. Her armor suddenly felt heavier. They reached the sub-level access and keyed open the hatch. The air inside was cooler, stale. Lights flickered in a lazy rhythm, like they were blinking in code. Kalira stepped in first, her hand never far from her weapon. Rian followed, muttering something under his breath that sounded like an apology to the ceiling. "You talk to infrastructure often?" "Only the ones that might collapse on me." They moved deeper. The walls were different here, older, less military, more ceremonial. There were marks etched along the surface, faint and geometric. Kalira reached out and touched one. It glowed, Rian whistled. "You've got the magic touch." "I don't like this." "You don't like anything." "I especially don't like ancient alien corridors lighting up for me." "Fair." The pulse sounded again, not just through the walls, through her. It buzzed along her spine, a rhythm she didn't recognize but couldn't ignore. At the end of the corridor was a door, not a hatch, not a bulkhead, a door smooth and seamless. It hummed like it was breathing. She reached out. It opened before she could touch it. Beyond it lay a chamber, circular and vast. At its center stood a platform, and on the platform another panel, identical to the one above. She stepped forward. Ryan stayed at the threshold. "Not coming in. I'm considering my life choices." "Too late for that." She approached the panel. As she got closer, lights bloomed beneath her feet, tracing her path. When she stepped onto the platform, the pulse stopped. Silence swallowed the chamber. Then the panel lit up. Symbols danced across its surface, some familiar, some impossibly old. And in the air above it, a projection flickered to life. It was her, not exactly her. The ears were the same, the face too, but the armor was different, ceremonial, ornate. She stood beside a man, Ryan. She turned slowly. "Tell me that's not you." He stepped forward, frowning. "I think it is." The projection showed them standing together on the platform. Then it shimmered. A battle, a storm, a world breaking apart. She raised her hand, energy crackling at her fingertips. He shielded her. Then the image fractured into static. Kalira stared at the panel, then back at him. "This is impossible." Rian looked pale. "I've been having these dreams since I was a kid. I thought they were just dreams." "You never thought to mention that you were dreaming of alien ruins and a woman with long ears?" "People tend to call that a problem, not a conversation starter." She pressed a hand to her head. "You are the worst reincarnated soldier I have ever met." "I didn't get a manual." The platform trembled beneath them. Symbols shifted. One word emerged in glowing script. "Return." Kalira felt something stir in her chest, a memory or something close. She saw herself standing here before, different yet the same. Saw fire and loss, a promise made, a war unfinished. The chamber began to dim. "We need to leave, or summary," she said. Rian didn't move. "I think it just chose us." "Then it has terrible taste. Move!" They bolted as the lights flickered and the door sealed behind them. Back in the corridor, Kalira leaned against the wall, breath shallow. "I don't want to be chosen," she muttered. "Too late," he said, catching his breath. "You lit up a 30,000-year-old room with your face. That's not nothing." She shot him a look. "Next time you go first." "Deal," he said, "but only if I get ceremonial armor. Yours looked very shiny." The second she opened her eyes, Kalira knew something was wrong. Not wrong in the catastrophic, entire outpost collapsing sense. They'd already survived that particular flavor of chaos. But wrong in the quieter, more personal way. Like waking up in someone else's dream and realizing you're late for an apocalypse you didn't RSVP to. Rian was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the cracked wall where the control pulse had last surged. His datapad hovered above his knee, flickering softly. He didn't look up. "I didn't dream," she said, her voice rough. He grunted. "I did. We were both much taller, and I had hair." "Sounds terrifying." "It was majestic, actually." She sat up, the memory of the chamber's projection lingering like static behind her eyes. The ghost of her past, or someone she used to be, staring back at her with the weight of a war that hadn't ended. The corridor lights were dimmer now, pulsing with an almost maternal rhythm, like the outpost itself was breathing with them. or watching them. Kalira reached for her weapon, checked the power cell out of habit. You know, Rian said, still not looking up, if this place is alive, maybe we should stop poking it. I'm not poking, I'm investigating. With a gun. Same thing. He finally looked at her, his smile faint. You ready to finish this? She nodded. Let's go find whatever version of us started this whole mess. The pulse led them downward, further than the original blueprints of the outpost suggested even existed. The walls changed again, shedding all signs of Terran construction. The architecture became more fluid, like it had been grown instead of built. Symbols bloomed across the walls, whispering as they passed. Kalira caught fragments in her mind. Commands, warnings, memories. None of them hers, but all of them familiar. At the lowest level, the chamber opened like a flower in bloom. A sphere floated at its center, suspended in a lattice of light. Beneath it, a platform. Atop it, another projection shimmered to life. This time it spoke. You returned. Kalira and Ryan both froze. The voice wasn't mechanical or alien. It was theirs. Both of them, echoes layered over time. The projection split, forming two figures. Kalira saw herself again, wearing the ceremonial armor. And beside her, the man Rian had seen in his dreams. Together they reached toward the sphere. It was our choice, the echo of Kalira said, to preserve what we could, to forget what we must, until the time was right. You bound your memories, the echo of Ryan added, to protect the gate from falling into the wrong hands. Only we could open it again. Kalira exhaled slowly. So this was never about the outpost. It was the gate. Not just a gate, Rian muttered. The archive. It holds the knowledge of every species that vanished in the collapse. Everything that came before. The sphere pulsed. The air thickened with potential. Kalira stepped forward. I don't remember choosing this. The projection smiled. You weren't meant to, until now. Convenient, Ryan said. Anything else we left ourselves? A time machine? Lottery numbers? The echoes faded, and the sphere dropped onto the platform with a whispering sigh. Kalira touched it. The world split, not physically but inward, where the remnants of memory came rushing in like a dam broken. She staggered. Battles across stars, worlds burning, a promise spoken in a forgotten tongue, and Ryan, always there, always beside her, her second, her equal, her friend. When she opened her eyes, the room hadn't changed, but she had. It was like finding the edge of a puzzle piece and realizing you were always part of a larger picture. Ryan reached for her. You okay? I remember everything. Well, most of it. Some of it is extremely blurry and involves a very questionable haircut. You too? I remember wearing purple robes. Why? Symbol of command, apparently. Fashion crimes, more like. She laughed, and the chamber seemed to brighten. So what now? He asked. Kalira stared at the sphere. The archive is ours. We're the key. If we leave, it seals again. No one else can access it. We could take it back, he said. Share it. Let the coalition learn from it. They'll fight over it, just like before. He frowned. So we keep it hidden? She considered, then shook her head. We teach it, quietly, slowly, not through politics or war, through story, memory. Let it seed the stars again. You're saying we become librarians, with weapons. I like it, he said. Dangerous, grumpy librarians with boundary issues. And long ears. They turned back toward the corridor. The lights shifted to guide them out, as if the outpost had been waiting. As they climbed back to the upper levels, Kalira looked over her shoulder one last time. No echoes followed. Outside, the dust had settled. The sky was clear. Their shuttle, battered and half buried in sand, still waited like a loyal pet. Rian kicked the side panel and muttered something about unreliable Terran engineering. As they powered up the console, she turned to him. Why did you follow me? Back then? All those lifetimes ago? He blinked. I thought I already did. Number before the war, before the oath. He tilted his head, considering. You looked at me like I wasn't broken. Kalira smiled faintly. That's because I was worse. He grinned. Still are. She reached over and flicked a switch. Strap in, Lieutenant. We've got an archive to deliver and no idea how to explain any of this without sounding completely insane. He settled into his seat. You say that like it's new. As the shuttle lifted, the outpost shimmered one last time, then faded beneath the sand, sealing itself again. Behind them, the chamber went dark, but above, the stars waited. The ship split the sky like a silver needle drawing a sharp line across the clouds. It hovered, humming with power, above the United World Government Complex, casting a long, elliptical shadow over the courtyard fountain. People had gathered, despite the warnings, pressing against barricades with phones raised, ready to film their first glance at the Alarian enforcer. A few vendors had even appeared, peddling shirts that read, "I was briefly terrified at the first contact event," in garish fonts. Jackson Reed wasn't in the crowd. He was late. He was always late, especially for things involving paperwork or, in this case, interstellar political integration. He jogged up the front steps, clutching a lopsided briefcase and a half-eaten protein bar, nearly colliding with a woman in a full exosuit. She hissed a profanity in Mandarin and shoved past him. Jackson, unoffended, gave her a thumbs up and kept going. Inside, security was tight and everyone was tense. The kind of tense you get when someone might vaporize your spleen for looking at them wrong. Jackson passed through 3 biometric scans, 2 DNA samplers, and 1 oddly personal mind scan that made him feel judged for that thing he did at a bachelor party 5 years ago. By the time he entered the conference chamber, the Alari envoy was already there. She stood at the head of the obsidian table, flanked by 2 guards in armor that shimmered like oil on water. Her uniform was severe and tailored, her stance coiled like a blade sheathed in decorum. Her skin had the faint shimmer of iridescence, her posture imperial, and her long ears swept back like the wings of a falcon. She radiated unapproachability, the kind that made even seasoned diplomats sit up straighter. Jackson stopped halfway to the table. She hadn't noticed him yet, probably because she was focused on the giant transparent data screen floating before her, which displayed Earth's planetary offenses in sharp Alari glyphs, most of which translated to things like inefficient waste management or excessive radio wave pollution. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and clear, each word falling like an edict. You have used plastic straws in oceanic regions classified as ecological recovery zones. Jackson cleared his throat. Only like 2% of us. The rest of us just use those sad paper ones that dissolve before you finish your drink. Her head turned. She looked at him for the first time. For someone bred for war and duty, her eyes were disturbingly expressive. There was a flicker of something, surprise maybe, before it vanished under a fresh layer of imperious disdain. You are the liaison. Jackson offered a lopsided smile and extended a hand. Jackson Reed, civilian liaison and part-time sandwich critic. You can call me Jack, but most people just call me by accident when they're trying to reach tech support. She did not take his hand. Captain Valai of the Alari Dominion, she said, as if the name alone should rearrange the furniture in respect. I am here to audit and ensure your species' compliance with Dominion protocols. Awesome. I brought snacks, Jackson said, pulling a crumpled bag of puffed algae chips from his coat. They taste like despair, but in a nostalgic way. No reaction. Her ears flicked slightly, though. He couldn't tell if that meant amusement or homicidal intent. Valai resumed her list. You have failed to regulate terrestrial climate zones, contributing to destabilizing the planetary atmosphere. Your satellite orbits are erratic and poorly maintained. Your primary data network hosts over 200,000 hours of visual content devoted to a creature known as the Slippery Banana Man. Jackson raised a finger. Technically, only 80,000 of those are original content. The rest are reposts. Valai stared at him. Her silence was like the space between stars. Vast, cold, slightly judgmental. He shrugged. Just saying. She pressed a control on her wrist cuff. A sphere the size of a basketball floated into view, projecting real-time data feeds, environmental analytics, and a 3-dimensional model of Earth's orbit. Jackson watched for a moment, chewing on his algae chip. You ever think this whole galaxy might just be a group project? And Earth's that one kid who forgot the deadline? He asked. Valai blinked. Her mouth parted, only slightly. She didn't respond. Not with words, but her gaze didn't have that annihilation gleam anymore. Just a puzzled glint, like she'd stumbled upon a new species of bug that smiled and made puns. "You are flippant," she said at last. "Professionally," Jackson replied, "also helps me not panic when I'm sitting across from someone who could rip a hole through a battleship with a butter knife." That oddly did something. Attention shifted. It wasn't visible, but the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It was warmer, maybe, or at least not actively freezing. She resumed speaking, but the cadence had softened by a degree. "You will escort me through all primary and secondary administrative centers, explain compliance shortcomings, and assist in corrective measures." "Sure thing. You want that with a side of fries or planetary unrest?" Vilai didn't respond, but her eyes lingered a moment too long. And then, as if recalling the proper amount of emotional detachment, she turned briskly toward the corridor. They walked side by side through the facility. Jackson tried to keep up with her precise military gait, but he kept tripping over his own shoelaces. At one point he muttered, "I swear these things are conspiring against me," and she made a sound that might have been a laugh or a suppressed cough. Security officers and diplomats stared as they passed, mouths slightly open. Jackson leaned toward Vilai and whispered, "I think they expected you to arrive riding a flaming war beast." "I'm kind of disappointed too." "I do not require war beasts to establish dominance," Vilai replied without breaking stride. "Sure, but imagine the merch." They entered a room lined with holographic charts showing Earth's energy use. Vilai scrutinized every statistic, questioning every variance, every spike. Jackson explained most of them as best he could, but eventually ran out of knowledge and started improvising. "This dip here? That's when the global power grid overloaded because someone tried to stream all 12 seasons of Space Hospital in 4D. You are making this up." "Am I?" "You are," he grinned. "Yeah, but admit it. For a second, you doubted yourself." Vilai didn't answer, but her ear twitched again. As the day dragged on, she never once sat down. She never showed fatigue. She asked, demanded, evaluated. And Jackson just kept being Jackson, witty, relaxed, oddly insightful at the strangest moments. When she mentioned Dominion ethics codices, he asked if they had any footnotes about empathy. When she rattled off efficiency ratios, he suggested measuring joy as part of the productivity index. The sun was setting when they reached the rooftop garden, a rare patch of green meant to demonstrate sustainable design. Vilai stood still for a long time, looking at the flora. Her expression, so carefully armored all day, shifted again, subtly. Then she turned toward him. "You are different from the others." "I moisturize," Jackson replied. For a moment she said nothing. Then against all expectation she asked, "Do you always speak like this?" "Only when I'm awake." She stared at him, and he stared back. And then, just as the wind rustled the alien flowers at their feet, he said, "You know, you're kind of beautiful when you scowl like that." Silence. It hit like a comet, sudden and wide. Her face didn't change. Not exactly, but something in her eyes flickered. The silence lasted a beat too long. "I beg your pardon?" she said. Jackson blinked. "I mean, just an observation, a compliment." "Sorry, was that inappropriate? I can go back to talking about satellite failures if you want." She looked away. Her jaw tightened, but not in anger. Something else. She stepped back, just slightly, as if recalibrating her entire frame of reference. "No one has spoken to me like that," she said, her voice quieter than it had been all day. Jackson scratched the back of his neck. "Well, now someone has." And then, without another word, Vilai turned and walked away. Not quickly, not sharply, just walked. Jackson stood there, the garden buzzing softly around him, wondering what he'd just done. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the administrative compound 5 minutes early, a feat so rare it nearly triggered a security lockdown. The guards at the main gate glanced at him with suspicion, as if punctuality might be contagious. He waved his badge, offered one a bite of his breakfast burrito, was politely refused, and strolled through humming with more caffeine than blood. He half expected to be turned away. After all, he'd broken some kind of invisible protocol the day before, saying something human and stupid to someone whose species treated emotional detachment like a constitutional right. Vilai was already waiting in the same room, back ramrod straight, fingers clasped behind her. She didn't acknowledge his presence when he entered, nor when he said, "Morning, Captain. Sleep okay, or did you just glare at the stars until they blinked first?" Her silence was a kind he was starting to interpret. Not angry, just calculating. She studied him out of the corner of her eye, like she was trying to decide if he was an anomaly, a threat, or just an inconveniently ambulatory curiosity. He pulled up a second chair and plopped into it. "So today's the big tour of the water reclamation centers. It's every bit as glamorous as it sounds." She turned toward him slowly. "Explain your behavior yesterday." "Oh, that. You mean the compliment?" "I mean the interruption. The unauthorized statement. The personal comment directed at a high-ranking Dominion officer?" He rubbed his chin. "You mean when I said you were beautiful?" Her eyes narrowed and her ears did that twitch again. "Yeah, that," he continued. "That was mostly because I was thinking it and didn't have the good sense to keep my mouth shut. Happens to me around street food and emotionally repressed aliens alike." Valai's jaw clenched. "You do not comprehend the implications of your words." Jackson scratched his temple. "That's fair. But also, I think maybe you don't comprehend the implications of hearing something nice every once in a while. No offense." She didn't blink. The silence stretched again. He sipped his synth coffee. She stared at him like he was some unclassified life form that had wandered into a restricted sector and declared itself a motivational speaker. "We will proceed with today's agenda," she said at last. "Sure. And for the record, still not taking it back." She strode ahead, not waiting to see if he followed. He did, matching her brisk steps with a light bounce in his own, unconcerned that she probably fantasized about turning him into a footnote in a Dominion court transcript. The transport shuttle they took to the reclamation site was sleek and eerily quiet. Vilai said nothing the entire ride. Jackson filled the silence by listing bizarre Earth beverages, describing each with increasing absurdity. "So then there's pickle soda. Tastes like betrayal and regret. Pretty sure it violates at least 3 Geneva Conventions." She didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched. Once, at the facility, she examined the purification arrays, atmospheric moisture harvesters, and nanofilter turbines with relentless focus. Jackson followed her, explaining in layman's terms how Earth barely scraped by with jury-rigged tech and a whole lot of duct tape. At one point, he pulled open a panel to reveal a motherboard held in place with chewing gum and good intentions. Vilai stared at it, then at him. "This passed your internal quality assurance?" "No, but the guy who installed it has a very charming dog." She didn't reply. She just took a picture with her ocular lens implant and muttered something in Alari that might have been a curse or a prayer. Probably both. By noon, the inspection had turned into something else. She still questioned everything, but her tone softened, and her sentences grew longer. She asked how many humans were involved in reclamation efforts, what motivated them, why Earth hadn't switched to Dominion water synthesis protocols. Jackson explained the resistance to off-world tech, the pride in fixing things with their own hands. He talked about climate guilt and redemption projects and the weird, stubborn hope that maybe they hadn't completely screwed themselves. And somewhere between nanofiber filters and algae-based irrigation systems, Vilai asked, "Why are you not afraid of me?" Jackson blinked. "Oh, I am." Terrified. "You move like a missile with legs. But I figure if I'm going to die vaporized, I might as well go out with a good line." She stared at him. He shrugged. "You're not just a symbol, Vilai. You're a person. You've got thoughts, feelings, probably a favorite kind of starlight or whatever." "Starlight has no flavor." "Metaphor, Captain. Learn to dance with it." She turned away before he could see her mouth curve. That evening, back at the compound, Vilai called off her security detail. They protested. She dismissed them with a tone that could boil oceans. Jackson met her in the conference lounge, holding 2 cups of what he claimed was the best approximation of real hot chocolate Earth still had. She took it cautiously, sniffed it, sipped. Her eyes widened a fraction. "This is not unpleasant." High praise from a woman who called our orbital satellites drunken space garbage. They sat in near silence, but it wasn't the same as before. It was a quiet with breathing room. Jackson didn't press, and Valai didn't flee. At one point, he told a story about accidentally activating a malfunctioning delivery drone that chased him across 4 city blocks, screaming, "Package acquired." Valai listened, lips tightly pressed, until finally she let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a scoff. The moment passed quickly. Her posture snapped back to attention. But she looked at him differently now, not like an errant data point, but like something unexpected that might matter. Later, when they parted, Jackson said, "Hey, for what it's worth, I still think you're beautiful, and not just when you scowl." Valai's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped. "Your words are difficult to categorize." "Good. That means they're getting through." She didn't answer, but after she walked away, her steps were slower, as if the ground beneath her no longer demanded such rigid control. Elsewhere, in a hidden alcove of Dominion Orbiting Command, a set of sensors logged her biofeedback levels. A sub-AI flagged the anomaly: emotional deviation, unusual cardiac rhythm. It sent a ping to central analysis. Subject Valai exhibiting signs of divergence. No immediate action was taken, but somewhere in the depths of the Dominion archives, a file was opened and a new designation was entered: Jackson Reed, emotional contaminant. The final day of Valai's inspection was far less ceremonious than the others. She didn't arrive with her usual precision. There was no entourage, no sharp command to follow her every step. Instead, she came alone, and when Jackson arrived in the conference hall, she was already there, standing by a window, looking out at the city skyline, her posture softer than it had ever been. For the first time, Jackson didn't have to break the silence. It was there, hanging between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He let it linger, sipping his coffee, watching the first rays of morning sunlight bounce off the towers below. He had learned, in 100 small moments over the past weeks, that this quiet pause was where the real conversations were being held. "You're leaving soon," he said, setting his mug down. The question hung in the air. He wasn't asking. He knew the answer, but it needed to be said, like a closure that hadn't quite happened yet. Valai didn't look at him. "Yes, you'll go back to your people, to your mission." "I will." There was no bitterness in her voice, no venom, just the bare facts. It made something stir in Jackson's chest. He took a step closer, fighting the instinct to fill the space with jokes or sarcasm. It wasn't needed, not now. "You know, I thought maybe I'd be relieved when you left," he said, "that we'd go back to normal, just another day of alien audits and environmental reports. But," he let the words trail off, "I guess I'm not." Valai's ear flicked, almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure what you want me to say." He smiled, a slow, almost rueful grin. "You don't have to say anything. I think I figured it out. I think I understand why you don't let anyone in." He looked at her, really looked at her, noticing the slight tremor in her hand as she held the datapad. She was always in control, always so measured, but today she was human. He couldn't help but admire it. "Being strong is all you've ever known, right?" She turned, the cold facade slipping for just a second. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "Strength is necessary when weakness is a liability." "I get that," Jackson said, leaning against the table, his tone lighter than it felt. "But you know, if everyone around you is weak, you end up alone. Even the strongest person can't lift themselves up forever." Her gaze didn't waver, but something in her softened. She set the datapad down, and for a moment, the professional Alari officer, the relentless warrior, was just Valai. A person standing in the same room as him, breathing the same air. Jackson had expected the emotional standoff to continue, expected her to retreat into the stoic mask she wore so effortlessly. But today was different. "You've made it harder," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "This softness." He chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not softness. It's just real. You don't have to wear armor every second. It's okay to just be." The silence stretched again, but now it was warm, comfortable. And then, unexpectedly, Vilai smiled. It wasn't wide and it wasn't easy, but it was there. A slight curling of the edges of her lips, almost imperceptible. It was enough. "So what now?" she asked. "What happens next?" Jackson ran a hand through his hair, not quite sure. The days that followed Velai's arrival had been a whirlwind of unexpected revelations. There was the diplomatic paperwork, of course, and the endless data reports. But beyond that, something else had changed. He had come to understand that Velai was more than just a symbol of alien power, more than just a face of an empire that Earth had feared for years. She was a person. She had vulnerabilities. She had fears. And somewhere along the way, she had let him see them. "I don't know," he said slowly, "but I don't think I'm going to let you leave without getting some answers." Her eyebrow arched slightly. "Answers?" "Yeah," he said, his voice taking on a teasing tone. "Like why you always look like you're about to blow up a planet when I make a joke, and why the hell you never let anyone get close." "Maybe I don't like people to ask questions I'm not ready to answer," she replied, but there was no sharp edge to her words. They were just two people talking, finally speaking, without the weight of their roles pressing down on them. Vilai didn't have an answer to that. Instead, she walked to the window, standing with her hands clasped behind her, looking out at the vast city below. Jackson joined her, standing side by side in silence for a few moments. The moment was interrupted by a faint chime. Vilai reached for her wrist device, glancing down at the message with a sharp inhale. It was a communique from her fleet, orders to return. The mission was nearly over. "Well, looks like the universe isn't going to pause for us," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. "Yeah," Jackson said with a half smile. "Does it ever?" Vilai turned to face him again, her eyes no longer cold, no longer calculating. There was something human in them now, something tender. "I think I owe you one last thing." He raised an eyebrow. "A thank you?" She tilted her head slightly, then surprised him with the softest of smiles. "A promise. I'll consider your perspective. When I go back." Jackson's smile widened, a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "I think that's about as good as I'm going to get, huh?" "It's better than you think." The air between them was no longer tense. It wasn't even strained. For the first time, it felt like two people, two beings who had crossed the vastness of space and time just to understand each other, if only for a moment. And for Jackson, that was enough, more than enough. He offered his hand, half expecting the usual dismissive reaction. But instead, Vilai surprised him again. She took it, firm but not crushing, her grip steady, as if she had finally found someone who could stand beside her, without crumbling under the weight of her world. "I'll be watching," she said with a grin, a little playful this time. "Earth performance, the plastic straws, the satellite crashes, all of it. I'm counting on you to call us out when we mess up," Jackson replied with a grin of his own. "We could use the feedback." They shared one last look, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Vilai's ship would leave soon, and the mission would end. But something had shifted. The vast expanse of space between them no longer felt so distant. It felt smaller, more connected. As she walked toward the door, Jackson couldn't help but call out, "Hey, Vilai!" She stopped, turning her head just slightly. "Don't forget the starlight," he said. "It's got flavor. You just have to taste it." For a long moment, she stood silent, and then finally she nodded. "Goodbye, Jackson Reed," she said. "Until next time," he replied, watching as the woman who could shatter a planet with her mind and whose heart now felt just a little bit less distant, walked out of the room. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson felt at peace. The sky was on fire again, not metaphorically. Mace Harrow had lost his taste for metaphors somewhere between the second orbital drop and the moment his squad got turned into red mist by a kinetic barrage. No, it was literally on fire. Jets of plasma streaked overhead like angry gods scribbling on the atmosphere, and debris from orbiting gunships fell in lazy arcs, trailing heat and smoke like dying comets. He lay half-buried under twisted alloy plating, his left leg numb, his right arm slick with blood. His helmet HUD flickered uselessly, the targeting grid dancing across his vision like it was drunk and trying to do karaoke. He blinked, tried to call for evac. Nothing. Not that he expected much. Command had stopped answering an hour ago, probably too busy deciding which pile of corpses was worth saving. The good news was he couldn't feel the pain anymore. The bad news was that usually meant the brain was giving up. He took a breath. It tasted like copper and melted plastic. Something moved. Not the wind. Not the settling of burning wreckage. This was smoother, intentional. A shape, humanoid, stepping lightly across the chaos like it had somewhere much better to be. He squinted. Not a medic. Too tall. Too graceful. Also glowing. He opened his mouth to say something heroic, maybe a final joke, but ended up coughing blood onto his chest plate instead. Classic. The figure crouched beside him, her silhouette outlined by the flicker of nearby flames. She looked human enough to confuse the dying. Long limbs, smooth features, a cascade of dark hair falling like water down her back. But her ears were long and tapering, like crescent moons tilted forward, and her eyes shimmered with violet light, not reflected but generated. The kind of eyes that belong to predators or deities. "You're leaking," she said, voice as calm as static in a quiet room. "I was hoping no one would notice," he croaked. "Very embarrassing." She tilted her head, watching him like a biologist inspecting a new specimen. Then, without warning, she bit her own wrist. Mace watched, morbidly fascinated, as thick black blood welled up, almost iridescent. She pressed it to his lips. "No offense," he mumbled, "but I usually like dinner before mysterious fluids." Swallow. He did, because arguing required more breath than he had left. The effect was immediate. Fire surged through his body, not the external kind, but an internal ignition, like someone had swapped his veins for molten wire. His back arched involuntarily, a scream throttled in his throat. Every nerve lit up, screamed, then fell silent. The world blurred, tilted. He passed out somewhere between the pain and the realization that he might never need coffee again. He woke up in a bed that looked suspiciously alive. It throbbed faintly beneath him, not unpleasantly, but in the way a thing does when it knows you're not from around here. The ceiling above him pulsed with soft biolight, a web of glowing threads forming patterns that changed when he blinked. He sat up too fast and nearly blacked out. "Oh, good, you live," came a voice from the doorway. The woman stepped in, wearing robes that shimmered like oil on water, her expression unreadable. Her ears twitched slightly when she looked at him. Mace tried to find his boots, dignity and sidearm in that order. Found none of them. "Last thing I remember, I was dying," he said. "You were. And now I'm, what, upgraded? Half alien, mostly confused? You're bloodbound. Is that like married?" She looked at him, blinked once. "Worse." She introduced herself. "Velhara, emissary of the Asuran Collective, soldier scholar of the Bloodhouses, and apparently his something. Translator, nurse, soul roommate." He tried to process it. The Asurans were a mystery even to Earth's top diplomats. Biotech symbiotes, generational memory, ships grown rather than built. They had vampire myths to thank for humanity's impressions, graceful, eternal, terrifying. But none of those stories had mentioned being saved by one on a battlefield and waking up biologically entwined. So, what does bloodbound mean exactly? Like, can you read my thoughts? Number, but I can feel your emotions, as you feel mine. That's going to be awkward if I ever have to, lie about liking someone's cooking. "I do not cook," he grinned. "Well, that's one awkward dinner party saved." She didn't smile, but the air around her warmed slightly. Or maybe that was the wall. Or maybe it was him. Hard to tell with alien architecture. He was allowed to walk after another few hours. His muscles remembered how, even if his mind still felt like a sock drawer tipped over. Velhara led him through corridors that curved organically, the walls studded with nodules that blinked when he looked at them. The whole place felt less like a building and more like a large creature reluctantly hosting a guest. It didn't quite trust not to touch the art. At some point, his stomach growled. Loudly. Velhara looked at him like he'd just barked. That is not a mating signal, is it? She asked. Mace blinked. What? No, it means I'm hungry. She stared at him a beat longer, then nodded. I will acquire nutrition. Try not to bond with anything else while I'm gone. Left alone, he sat on a bench that retracted slightly to accommodate him, humming nervously. Somewhere down the hall, a door side open. The place smelled like ozone and rain, and something almost like cinnamon. He felt different, stronger, faster, hungrier, but also tethered, like there was a string inside his chest, pulled gently toward the direction Velhara had gone. It wasn't unpleasant, just new. When she returned, she brought food in a translucent bowl, something green and gelatinous that shimmered faintly. What is it? He asked, poking it with a spoon that bent unnervingly. It is called Trek, high protein, nourishing, slightly sentient. He paused. Slightly? If it sings, do not engage. He ate it anyway. It didn't sing, but it did hum, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he found it oddly comforting. Later, as he lay in a bed that breathed in time with him, Velhara stood at the edge of the room, watching him silently. You saved me, he said, half asleep. You were inconveniently dying. Still, thanks. She nodded just once. Outside the organic walls, somewhere beyond the bioship's hull, Earth and Axera spun in different directions, old suspicions stirring, factions murmuring. But in that small, humming chamber, two hearts beat in tandem, not by choice, not yet by trust, but by blood. Mace woke to the sound of something singing. At first he thought it was a dream, a soft, warbling melody that reminded him of whale calls filtered through a synthesizer. Then he remembered the trek from last night and sat bolt upright, eyes scanning the dimly glowing room. The bowl was still there, empty. The singing, unfortunately, was coming from his shirt. He picked it up cautiously. The threads of the alien fabric pulsed gently, rhythmically. He held it at arm's length. I'm not wearing anything that composes its own soundtrack, he muttered. Velhara's voice came from the other room. It's calibrating to your nervous system. You may be experiencing a bonding overture. That's what we're calling it now, he said, squinting at the garment. I had a girlfriend once who tried the same thing with jazz. The shirt quieted when he pulled it on, forming neatly around his arms and torso like it had been grown just for him. It probably had. He stepped into the hallway, half expecting more furniture to start harmonizing. Velhara was already awake, probably had been since last week, standing in front of a wall that was projecting a swirling holographic map of what looked like the local star systems, if star systems had weather patterns and traffic congestion indicators. We're being transferred, she said without turning. Mace blinked. Transferred? I thought I was recovering. You are, but the Axeran Council has summoned us. Your presence is now diplomatically required. He crossed his arms. Am I still a lieutenant? Technically. Do I get hazard pay for being half alien now? Doubtful. The ship, or creature, he still wasn't sure, shifted subtly, and he felt it change course, realigning with something massive and unseen. They were headed to Nastrial Prime, a space station the size of a small continent orbiting a binary star. Mace had read about it once in a report he definitely hadn't skimmed. It was supposed to be a diplomatic hub, a city of treaties and secrets balanced precariously on the edge of multiple peace agreements. The kind of place where one wrong smirk could start a war. He was going there in an outfit that sang. By the time they arrived, Velhara had given him a crash course in Axeran etiquette, which mostly boiled down to, don't touch anything unless it touches you first, don't assume smiles mean goodwill, and never, under any circumstances, offer your blood unless you're proposing something permanent. Mace had nodded through it all while internally preparing for the worst-case scenario. Alien appetizers at a formal dinner. Nastrial Prime was less like a station and more like a sculpture in motion. Giant rings rotated slowly, lined with bioluminescent flora and transparent transit tunnels. Ships docked through living airlocks, which inhaled new arrivals with a sound halfway between a sigh and a question. As they disembarked, Mace tried to walk with dignity. The ship burped behind them. He kept walking. The Axeran embassy was housed in a spire that coiled upward like a seashell made of glass and bone. Inside, light diffused without obvious sources, and the walls murmured softly in languages he didn't understand. He was introduced to 4 ambassadors, 2 sentient plants, and something that may have been a mobile fungus wearing a monocle. Every one of them looked at him like he was an unstable prototype, held together by chewing gum and poor decisions. "Is this him?" one of the officials asked Velhara, gesturing at Mace like he was a particularly odd fruit. "He is bloodbound," she said simply. Mace gave a weak wave. "Hi, still not contagious." They were led to a chamber filled with pulsing columns and floating data streams, where they were asked questions so delicately phrased he wasn't sure if they were interrogating him or trying to figure out how best to gift wrap him back to Earth. He did his best. Avoided sarcasm. Mostly. When they were finally released, Velhara looked at him with a vague expression of amusement, which he took as a sign she hadn't entirely lost hope. "Did I pass?" he asked. "No one fainted. That's an improvement." Later, alone in their temporary quarters, rounded rooms that hummed softly and adjusted their size depending on his mood, which he found disturbingly intimate. Mace sat on a couch that felt like memory foam, but sighed when he sat on it. He rubbed his temples. "So we're political mascots now," he said aloud. "Great. I always dreamed of being half of a romantic scandal that could collapse interspecies negotiations." Velhara was across the room, standing very still, her long ears twitching as she listened to something only she could hear. "You are not a mascot," she said. "You are a symbol of irreversible consequence." "That's not better." She turned toward him. "They think you're dangerous. I was just lying there bleeding to death. And now you are not. That makes you unprecedented." He exhaled slowly. "Look, I don't know what your people do with unprecedented things, but on Earth, we usually write terrible novels about them or make them trending topics for 72 hours. Do the Axorans have social media?" She blinked. "Yes, but it is telepathic." "Oh, good. So people are thinking mean things about me in real time." Despite the tension, the humor softened the edge between them. They shared something neither of them asked for, a connection that was deepening without permission. He'd started to feel it more acutely, her presence behind his thoughts, like someone humming in the same room. He knew when she was annoyed before she spoke. She could sense when he was about to make a joke, and sometimes sighed in advance. But not everything was bonding and awkward telepathy. That night, someone attempted to breach the outer ring of the Axoran embassy. A cloaked figure carrying a neural disruptor and a vial of anti-bio agent tailored to Mace's hybridized physiology. He only survived because Velhara caught the intruder mid-step, disabling him with a gesture that involved no physical contact, but a lot of screaming. When the security swarm dragged the would-be assassin away, Mace looked at Velhara, pale and shaken. "Was that meant for me?" She didn't answer. They slept in shifts after that, though Mace wasn't sure either of them really rested. He tried not to think about what it meant, that someone had gone to the trouble of designing a weapon specifically to sever the bond between them, and that it might have worked. But in the quiet hours when Nastriel Prime spun lazily above the stars, and the walls around them dimmed to a comforting dusk, he caught her watching him again, not with suspicion, not with wariness, with something that might have been regret or something older. He reached out, hesitated, then made a joke instead. "You know, I'm starting to think I'm the best bad decision you ever made." Velhara, without turning, said, "You are. But the alternative was letting you die." He leaned back, listening to the subtle hum of the station, the thrum of another's heartbeat buried inside his own. "So," he said, "what's the plan now?" She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was soft. "Now, we survive." Mace had never stood before a galactic tribunal before. That didn't stop him from cracking his knuckles like he did it every weekend. Velhara stood beside him in ceremonial garb woven from memory fiber, her long ears twitching once in quiet irritation as he adjusted his collar for the 5th time. "You look like you're about to confess to blowing up a star," she whispered. "I'm just trying to not sneeze," he whispered back. "These robes smell like musky wisdom and damp moss." "You're allergic to political consequence." "I prefer informal consequence." less dress code. The Grand Assembly Hall was vast, an echo chamber of consequence, truth, and, according to one of the marble-faced attendants, acoustics calibrated to make guilt sound slightly louder than innocence. A circular platform hovered in the center, suspended over what Mace hoped was not a bottomless pit, but knew deep down was absolutely a bottomless pit. Around them sat representatives from 37 species, 3 algorithmic consciousnesses, and a fungal hive mind known only as Lorb. Velhara had warned him not to look directly at Lorb. He was doing his best. The charge against them wasn't simple. By forming a blood bond across species without diplomatic sanction, they had triggered a cascade of treaties, taboos, and ancient prophecies that various parties were still translating. Some saw their union as heresy. Others, a loophole. And a few, apparently, had bet heavily on it in interstellar gambling circles. The first accusation came from a chitin-armored delegate who spoke in cliques. Velhara translated. "They claim your survival was a manipulation," she said, "that the Asaran blood used violated protocols of balance." "I didn't exactly file paperwork," Mace muttered. The next speaker was a floating jellyfish of light and math that accused Velhara of making a soldier into a weapon, binding him with an ancient rite to create a puppet. Mace tried to interject, but Velhara raised one hand, her expression stone. "You think I sought a puppet?" she said, voice ringing. "He interrupts every meeting. He refuses 3 out of 5 meals. He reprogrammed the diplomatic translator to speak in Earth sarcasm. If this is my weapon, it is the most insubordinate ever conceived." The room fell into a kind of silent confusion. A few chuckles. "Yes, even from Lorb." Mace smirked. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said about me." The questioning continued. Tense, relentless. Someone brought up the failed assassination attempt. Someone else suggested Mace's continued survival was a destabilizing influence. A third argued he should be studied, dissected, politely if possible. Mace, despite Velhara's very explicit instructions to let her handle it, eventually stepped forward. "Look," he said, "I didn't ask for this. I was bleeding to death in a crater the size of my childhood trauma. Velhara saved me, not to make a political point, not to forge some ancient alliance. She saw a life, and she chose to preserve it. And maybe that broke your rules. Maybe it twisted some sacred tradition or makes some star chart flicker in the wrong quadrant. But if we're punishing people for saving each other when they didn't have to, maybe the system's what's broken." Silence. One of the delegates leaned forward. "And you, human, do you consent to the bond?" "I didn't understand it then," Mace said, "but I do now. It's not chains. It's connection. And yeah, maybe we're messy and sarcastic and we don't match, but we're still here, together. I'd choose it again." Velhara glanced at him. Something in her stance softened. A long moment passed. Then the central column of the tribunal pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The assembled representatives murmured, shifted, sighed. "The bond shall stand," the central voice intoned. "No sanctions, no reversal, but neither shall it be precedent. Let this remain unique." Velhara bowed. Mace tried to bow and nearly fell off the platform. Dignity, mostly maintained. Afterward, they stood outside the assembly, watching the stars pulse and drift beyond the station's translucent shell. Mace leaned on the railing, arms crossed. "So, that went better than expected." "We were nearly declared an interstellar incident," Velhara said. "Nearly." There was a long pause, then she said, "You spoke well. I shocked myself, still not sure if it was courage or blood sugar." She turned toward him. "You've changed." He considered that. "I guess I stopped waiting to be rescued. Started choosing. Maybe that's what your people don't understand. They think it was a mistake, but it wasn't. We both made a choice, and now we live with it. Together," she said. He nodded. "Bloodbound and all." Velhara stepped closer, her presence familiar now, less alien and more like a song he had slowly learned the lyrics to. He felt the tether between them hum, not chains but a current, not prison, not obligation, just them. "So what now?" he asked. We go home. Which one? Yours or mine? She gave him a rare smile. Both. They returned to the living ship. It welcomed them with a pulse of light and a low melodic note that, to Mace's amusement, harmonized with his shirt. As they rose away from Nastral Prime, the stars tilted subtly, and for the first time since that day on the battlefield, Mace felt something like peace. He sat beside Velhara in the ship's viewing chamber, sipping something warm and possibly sentient. He looked at her, at the stars, at his reflection in the glass. I used to think I'd die with a laser rifle in one hand and a regret in the other, he said. And now I think I'll live longer than I ever wanted and argue with you about lunch for the rest of it. Velhara raised an eyebrow. It is better than dying, he laughed. That's the spirit. Outside, the universe spun on, uncaring and infinite. Inside, two lives, once separate, now bound by accident, blood, and choice, moved forward, one moment at a time. And if the future still held uncertainty, at least they'd face it the way they faced everything else now, together. The sky above the dense woods crackled with energy. A small, fiery streak blazed across it, trailing debris and smoke in its wake. The object plummeted, tearing through the atmosphere at an alarming rate, leaving a trail of twisted metal and fire in its path. The crash was inevitable, and in the woods below, a single figure, tall and clad in armor, stood motionless, her eyes scanning the sky. She was Lysara, the queen of the Phinarian Empire, and her ship was done for. She hadn't expected to end up here, on this primitive little planet, so far from her home and her people. The war was supposed to be the end of it all, the culmination of years of battle and strategy. Instead, it had become her undoing. Her ship, once a symbol of strength, had been reduced to a smoldering wreck in the woods. She stood amidst the wreckage, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The moment she'd realized her vessel was going down, there hadn't been time to assess the situation. She'd activated the emergency escape pods, and the last thing she remembered was the thud of the pod's impact with the ground. Her armor, now battered, covered her blue skin and long, pointed ears. She ran a gloved hand over her helmet as she stumbled out of the pod. The cool air of this foreign planet washed over her, and she stood there for a moment, taking it in. It was peaceful, a far cry from the wars she had fought across the galaxies. She felt the absence of conflict like a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like centuries, she allowed herself to breathe, just for a second. A sudden rustle in the underbrush broke her out of her thoughts. She immediately dropped into a defensive stance, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon she kept at her side. But then, from the trees ahead, emerged a man. He was dressed in simple clothing, a t-shirt and jeans, his messy brown hair falling into his eyes. He froze upon seeing her, his expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. Lysara had encountered countless alien species in her time, but humans? They were an enigma. She had read about them in the archives, but they weren't exactly the kind of species one interacted with on a regular basis. And yet, here one was, standing in front of her, staring with wide eyes. Hi, the man said, his voice cracking slightly. Lysara blinked, processing the greeting. You speak? She asked, her voice low and careful, testing the waters. She had heard that humans could be unpredictable, and she wasn't in the mood to deal with their strange ways. Yeah, that's usually what we do, the man replied with a nervous chuckle. He was clearly trying to stay calm, but the shock was written all over his face. Listen, I don't mean to be rude, but, are you real? Like, really real? She tilted her head, her long ears flicking slightly. I assure you, I am real, she said, her voice steady despite the unexpected encounter. She wasn't sure what kind of situation she was walking into, but if she was going to survive here, she would have to navigate it carefully. I am Lysara, Queen of the Phinarian Empire. I do not have time for your disbelief. The man blinked again, clearly trying to process the information. His gaze flickered from her to the wreckage of her ship. Queen? Like royalty? And Phinarian Empire? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and assume this isn't a prank, because that's a pretty elaborate costume. Lysara's lips curled slightly at his confusion. It wasn't often that someone didn't recognize her as the most powerful ruler in the galaxy. She supposed that was a blessing in disguise. After all, she wasn't looking for a confrontation. I am not wearing a costume, she said, her tone dry. I am stranded here. The man took a cautious step closer, still eyeing her with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Stranded? On Earth? This isn't, this isn't exactly the place I'd expect for a queen to crash land. Not that I know what a queen's crash landing looks like, but, you might want to call someone. Maybe NASA? NASA? Lysara echoed the word, unfamiliar with the term. She raised an eyebrow, trying to decipher his meaning. This NASA, is it a rescue operation? Well, sort of, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. They send rockets into space and stuff, I think. Look, I'm not an expert. Maybe you could, call them on your alien phone or something? Lysara stared at him blankly for a moment. Her advanced technology had been shattered in the crash, and her communication systems were beyond repair. She didn't know if calling a human organization would even be possible, even if she had the means. But she didn't have time for explanations right now. Her mission was to survive, to find a safe place to hide from the war that was coming. The last thing she needed was a lengthy conversation with a confused human. Instead, she sighed. I do not have the luxury of waiting for NASA. I require shelter, and I need it quickly. Can you help me? The man hesitated, still clearly unsure of how to react. Help you? I mean, sure, I guess I could. I don't exactly have a spaceship lying around, but my place is nearby. I can take you there. You, look like you could use a change of clothes. Lysara glanced down at herself, realizing that the tattered remnants of her armor were probably a little much for human society. She wasn't about to get into the finer details of her species' fashion sense with him, though. Lead the way, she said curtly. I am not in the mood to debate your fashion choices. Right. No argument here, he muttered under his breath, then started walking in the direction of the trees. Lysara followed closely behind, her senses alert. She wasn't entirely sure what she had just agreed to. But in this strange new world, a human seemed like the lesser of many dangers. If he was willing to help her hide, then she would take what she could get. She had no idea what she was walking into, but one thing was clear. The war she had been running from felt like a distant memory. Here in this strange land, there were new challenges to face, and somehow she had already started to feel a little less like a queen and a little more like someone who needed a place to stay. The man glanced back over his shoulder, a small, awkward grin tugging at his lips. By the way, I'm Alex, and, no offense, but if you could maybe not, destroy the place, that'd be great. Lysara gave a small nod, feeling a flicker of amusement. I will try to keep my powers in check, Alex, but no promises. The man laughed softly, shaking his head. Great, just great. The journey back to his house was silent, but in the quiet of the woods, Lysara found herself thinking, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, this strange human might be the least terrible option she had at the moment. Alex's front door creaked open with a reluctant groan, as if even the wood itself wasn't quite ready to deal with the cosmic absurdity currently stepping over the threshold. Lysara, tall and silent behind him, surveyed the modest interior with the calculated scrutiny of a war strategist inspecting a battlefield. Her eyes darted across the cluttered living room, half-finished puzzles, books stacked in precarious towers, an empty pizza box resting like a fallen monument on the coffee table. This is your throne room? She asked flatly. It's a one-bedroom rental, Alex replied, tossing his keys into a bowl by the door. Unless you count the bathroom as an annex of the royal court. Lysara stepped further in, her boots thudding heavily against the wood floors. The faint hum of alien tech still radiated from her armor, and every time she moved, it let out a faint hiss, as though offended by the surroundings. She walked slowly, inspecting a lava lamp on a side table like it might be a weapon. You use this for interrogation? She asked. That's a lava lamp. She tilted her head. So, Psychological warfare? No, it's... Never mind. You hungry? Because I think I've got something in the fridge that isn't expired. Or alien, hopefully. Lysera remained motionless for a long moment before responding. I am capable of digesting over 100 types of interstellar protein matter. However, I have never encountered your planet's frozen waffles. That makes two of us, Alex muttered, opening the fridge and poking a suspicious-looking, plastic-wrapped bundle with his finger. We'll stick with peanut butter toast. I mean, assuming you don't violently combust when eating legumes? She narrowed her eyes. I have survived neutron storms and acid rains. Your peanuts do not frighten me. Alex handed her a plate with cautious optimism. Well then, welcome to Earth. First contact is officially crunchy. She took a bite, chewed slowly, and blinked. This is edible. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my cooking. He plopped onto the couch and motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, glancing down at the lumpy cushions, like they might eat her. Finally, with royal poise and just a bit of a grimace, she lowered herself beside him. The couch groaned under the unfamiliar weight of alien dignity. They sat in silence, the only sound the occasional crunch of toast and the soft hum of the refrigerator. You said you're hiding from something, Alex said at last, trying to keep his tone casual but not too casual, like someone who's realized his house guest might be on a galactic wanted list. Yes, Lysera replied. I am. He waited, but she didn't elaborate. Care to expand on that, or are we just sticking with the vague and ominous? She glanced at him sidelong. Do you often question royalty this way? Only when they crash land in my backyard. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. There is a species known as the Voranth. They are opportunists, once loyal allies, now less so. Alex raised an eyebrow. Less so like passive-aggressive email unsubscribes, or more like open galactic betrayal? They attempted to vaporize me during peace negotiations. I suppose that leans toward the latter. Alex blinked. Yeah, that's definitely on the more hostile end of the spectrum. They believe I am dead, she continued, and I intend to keep it that way, until I can return properly prepared. So Earth's your witness protection program? I hate to break it to you, but this planet isn't exactly subtle. I do not need subtle, I need forgotten, and your species excels at forgetting things. Alex opened his mouth, then shut it again. Fair. She set the plate down and leaned back cautiously. You seem stable for a human. That's a suspicious compliment. And yet accurate. A flicker of energy suddenly danced over her armor, faint blue sparks trailing across the surface. She frowned and pressed a panel on her forearm. A quiet series of chimes sounded in response. Alex leaned over. Is that your alien Fitbit? It's a suit diagnostic. The power core is failing. The crash damaged more than I anticipated. Can I offer you a power strip? I have like 3. She gave him a long, flat look. He held up his hands. Okay, joke. Mostly. Lysera sighed and stood, the armor shifting slightly as she moved. I require a controlled environment, a secure location to conduct repairs. Alex gestured broadly around the room. You're in my house. If you find something secure, let me know. I've been looking for it since I moved in. She walked toward the hallway, opening doors without hesitation. What is this? That's a closet. She stared inside. A very small panic chamber. Yeah, that's where I panic about laundry. She moved on. The next door opened into the bathroom. She examined the toilet, leaned closer, and then looked at him. Explain this. Alex cleared his throat. I'd rather not. They ended up in his spare room, empty except for a dusty futon and a stack of boxes labeled, Stuff I'll Probably Never Need. Lysera walked the perimeter, tapping the walls and scanning with a small device that emitted a gentle clicking sound. This will do, she said at last. For what? My operations center. He scratched his head. You want to turn my spare room into an alien war room? Yes. Your cooperation is appreciated. Not like I was using it, he muttered. Lysera moved with sudden precision, removing panels from her suit and laying them out with care. From within one of the larger armor compartments, she extracted what looked like a handful of shimmering glass shards. With a flick of her wrist, They floated into the air and began assembling themselves into a translucent, flickering sphere. Alex stared. That's not from IKEA. It is a portable interface. I am adapting it to this planet's atmosphere. Your humidity is excessive. Yeah, we're known for that. That and reality TV. As the sphere stabilized, lines of alien script scrolled across its surface. Lysara studied them with an intensity Alex recognized instantly. The look of someone fighting not to let the weight of the universe crush her. He stepped back into the doorway, watching her silently. This strange, proud, deadly woman, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his spare room, lit by a hovering orb of alien tech. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt weirdly normal. You want some tea? He asked. She didn't look up. Is it a weapon? Number it's warm leaf juice. A pause. I will try your leaf juice. He nodded and walked off, muttering, another successful diplomatic mission. Behind him, Lysara allowed herself a breath. Just one. The room was small, cluttered, and far from the vast thrones of her empire. But for now, it was enough. She glanced toward the door, and just for a second, almost smiled. Almost. Alex awoke to the gentle, yet unsettling hum of alien machinery vibrating through the walls of his apartment. At first, he thought it might have been the neighbor's kid trying out a new sound system again, but when he opened his bedroom door and found a faint blue glow pulsing from the spare room, he remembered. His guest wasn't from this planet, and she had zero concept of quiet hours. He stumbled in, hair askew, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You know, he mumbled, some of us carbon-based life forms sleep during the dark part of the rotation. Lysara didn't look up from the shifting hologram surrounding her. I have calibrated this interface to low auditory emissions. The ambient hum is within tolerable Earth decibel levels. Yeah, well, Earth decibel levels assume you're not sharing a wall with a tactical alien command center. She tilted her head. Would you prefer a sonic dampening field? I'd prefer a coffee, but sure, that works too. As he turned toward the kitchen, a warning chime rang out behind him. He froze mid-step. Lysara stood abruptly, scanning the floating glyphs. Vorinth ships, she said quietly. They've traced my signal. Alex blinked. How? You said your suit was running on fumes. I rerouted the core through the interface for diagnostics. It emitted a brief but detectable signal. I thought the window was too narrow for tracking. Well, either they've upgraded their spyware or they really miss you. She narrowed her eyes at the holograms. They are approaching Earth's orbit. 2 cruisers, armed. Alex let out a low whistle. Great. So we're about to host uninvited guests who think assassination counts as diplomacy. They do not know I am here precisely, but they are scanning. Once they triangulate, he sighed. Let me guess. Boom. Yes, boom. There was a pause. I really hate Tuesdays, Alex muttered. The apartment quickly became a scene from a science fiction fever dream. Lysara initiated a defensive perimeter using devices that resembled metallic seashells, which latched onto the windows and emitted an iridescent shimmer. Alex, meanwhile, armed himself with a frying pan and a Nerf gun, because in his words, sometimes psychological warfare does start with confusion. They will attempt a low-key scan sweep first, Lysara said, adjusting her armor plates with practiced movements. If they do not detect me directly, they may retreat. Alex watched her from the doorway. So we play hide and seek, with death lasers. Essentially, the minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Outside, the world continued obliviously. Cars passing, birds chirping, somewhere a lawnmower droning along with no clue. An interstellar crisis was hovering just above the atmosphere. Alex sat on the couch, tapping his fingers nervously against his knee. I never asked, why here? Why Earth? Lysara's eyes didn't leave the interface. Because no one would expect me to come to a planet where civilization still debates whether or not socks should match. Hey, mismatched socks are a statement. Precisely. She finally looked at him then, and there was something softened in her expression. But I stayed because of you. He blinked. Me? You are not a soldier, not a strategist, not a mechanic, and yet you offered shelter, food, warmth, wit. Most species I've ruled would have sold me out for a chance at favorable trade tariffs. Alex shrugged. Well, I would have held out for a spaceship at least. A flash of light caught her attention. She turned sharply to the orb. Their scans are intensifying. They are beginning to suspect. So what do we do? I mean, unless you've got a cloaking field big enough to cover the entire building. She didn't answer immediately. Then slowly she began unfastening pieces of her armor. Alex blinked. Not that I'm complaining, but maybe this isn't the time for interpretive space striptease. She held up the suit's main core. I can overload the power cell, detonate it in the upper atmosphere. It will produce a surge strong enough to mimic my death signature. Alex stood. Whoa, hold on. You mean fly up there and blow yourself up? Number, I can send it via a drone. But once the core is gone, I lose my tech. The suit, the interface, my connection to the galactic network. I become one of you, which is a polite way of saying unemployed, underpaid, and badly in need of a dental plan. Her lips twitched. Yes. He crossed his arms, frowning. You'd give all that up? Your throne, your weapons, your alien Wi-Fi? I was a queen constantly hunted, constantly guarding my back. Here I am someone else. Someone with peanut butter toast and lava lamps. Alex smiled. It grows on you. With quiet efficiency, Lysera assembled a small drone from her gear. She inserted the glowing core into its body and programmed its trajectory. They stood side by side at the window, watching the tiny machine lift into the sky, vanishing in a streak of blue light. A few minutes later, the holograms flared. Lysera studied them in silence. Contact severed, she said at last. They've taken the bait. They believe I am gone. Alex exhaled. So, no more cruisers, no more scans. Just you, me, and the broken dishwasher. She turned to him. I'm sorry. The interface is gone. I cannot fix your dishwasher. It was a long shot. Later that evening, they sat on the couch. The apartment felt quieter now, like the hum of impending doom had finally faded. Lysara was dressed in simple borrowed clothes, her long ears poking out from under a hoodie that said, I paused my game to be here. You look human, Alex said. She lifted an eyebrow. Insult or compliment? Observation. She stared at the lava lamp. I do not miss the throne. It was a prison made of ceremony. He looked at her sideways. And here's a kingdom made of old pizza boxes and questionable plumbing. She leaned her head back, eyes closed. I think I prefer this kind of madness. He nudged her. So, what now? She smiled faintly. Now? I learned to make toast myself. They sat like that for a while, quiet, content. No Voron, no explosions, no blueprints of war hovering in the air. Just the hiss of the radiator and the warmth of two people who'd survived more than they expected and found something better than survival. Peace. You ever think of redecorating? She asked suddenly. You're the one who called my couch a plush disgrace to royalty. Well, she said, leaning back with a grin, I suppose I'll just have to rule it anyway. Alex chuckled. Long live the queen. She smirked, eyes closed. In exile, perhaps, but happy.